So today's topic about resilience, considering the fact there's a lot of shit going on there, how do we turn shit into fertilizer? So the question is, what is resilience?
The simplest description you can give is bouncing back from challenges, right? When something challenging happens, something potentially traumatic happens, or very stressful happens, we respond to that. It's not about not responding to that event, not getting affected from it at all. It's about bouncing back, going back to your baseline after that event is over, not being like long-term damaged by that event, to recover that event effectively. And people use bamboos, for example, as an example of resilience. Bamboo is a plant because it has such a flexibility. When there's a harsh wind coming in, it just like goes down a little bit, but the wind goes back, it comes back right back up. Right, so that's resilience. Resilience is not like being like a rock, not getting affected at all. Resilience is our ability to bounce back, to have the flexibility. And there are two ways of looking at it. One of them is physiological and one of them is mental. And both of are affecting how resilient we are. So if you think about physiological perspective, your nervous system reacts to challenges. We talked about this in earlier episodes. When a threat happens, our sympathetic nervous system gets activated and it prepares us to fight or flight, right? So our heart rate increases, we get mobilized, all our physiology changes, and then we release cortisol, and it has many effects. And we want that to happen because we want to deal with that threat, whatever that is, right? Mm-hmm. And whenever that threat goes away, I expect my body to go back to the safety system to function normally, right? Because the threat is gone already. So let's say I had a conversation with someone at work and they said something and I got really, really upset. I got really offended, right? And I started reacting to it. My physiology changed. And imagine that was just a misunderstanding, that I get that information. The person says, no, like this was that. And I realized, oh, this has nothing to do with being offensive. Now I understand the full picture. There was never a threat in the first place. So I have a mental understanding of, okay, there's no threat. You would expect I go back to the baseline, right? My body should go back to the safety.
Yeah.
For some people, it happens quickly. For some people, it doesn't. The body, physiologically, your nervous system doesn't shift from that fight or flight response, mobilization, back to safety. It takes a long time. So your blood pressure is still up, like you're still mobilized. So it's hard to get back to the feelings of peace and safety. And when we look at what happens there is your heart responding, and the heart is the part of that autonomic system that, is a big part of this response. And the vagus nerve regulating the heart, if it's not really toned well, it doesn't effectively slow down the heart rate to go back to the safety when your heart rate has increased, right? So your brakes are not working effectively. And if it's not working effectively, physiologically, you cannot go back to that state. You're not bouncing back physiologically. And if that nerve is strong, then it puts the brake very effectively, very easily, you bounce back from it.
Right.
And it has a psychological expression as well, because our psychological states and mental states depend on our physiological state first. We cannot have certain psychological states in that fight or flight state. So physiology needs to shift for us to be able to experience those psychological effects as well. So I don't know if you heard of HRV, heart rate variability. People training a lot use that to figure out.
No, please explain that. Also, please explain like physiology and our psychology a little bit and how they're attached. But before that, yeah, please explain What was it that you mentioned?
Heart rate variability, HRV.
Yeah, please talk about that. I'd like to
Well,
know what
heart rate variability is the variation in the time difference between heartbeats. It's not like a metronome. Your heartbeats, it doesn't have exact spacing between heartbeats. There's a variation between them. And we want to have high variety in that. We don't want them to be exactly the same. So, and heart rate variability is an indicator also our psychophysiological resilience, because it shows our ability to change according, to respond to the changes in the environment, right? That variability shows us that our heart is constantly reacting to the changes in the environment. And we want a responsive heart. When things change, we want our heart to, regulate itself according to that. So, and the connection between the I think psychology and physiology in the sense, because your nervous system is a connected system, and all the functioning of your organs, your brain processes depend on the functioning of and the state of your nervous system. So they are very, different expressions of the same system, right? And because of that, HRV is a very strong predictor. Actually, this is crazy. HRV is said to be a predictor of mortality of all causes.
Long term?
Which means that low HRV, if you have your heart rate variability is low, it's a predictor from mortality for all causes, meaning all kinds of diseases, if it's cancer, cardiovascular, any type of disease, accidents, name it. Because it shows how well your nervous system working, and if it's not working optimally, you are prone to get diseases. You're not recovering. Your body is not going to be fixing itself, healing itself.
I see. How do you improve HRV then? Is it? I assume it's related to a lot of things like stress.
It is, but it's also, again, because stress is a part of life. We always have stressors around. And the resilience, psychophysiological resilience, is our ability to deal with it, how much stress we can afford.
Right.
If you have low resilience, a small stressor can break you.
Right.
If you have high resilience, you can tolerate much higher levels of stress.
Right. I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So HRV is it's an indicator. Your heart rate variability measures how your actually nervous system is working in a way, and it's a predictor of your physical health. Also, it's a predictor of our mental health, and it's a predictor of our resilience. So we want optimal levels of heart rate variability, and there are ways to train your heart rate variability. There are certain things that you can do physiologically to improve that. And we can talk about that maybe in another episode, because it's going to be the whole episode. So maybe we can do the next one on heart rate variability and how it affects. But I just want to give that aspect of it. So we want to make sure physiologically our bodies are able to handle stress. But there's also the mental aspects of it that we see is important and resilient. So there has been studies and longitudinal studies that lasted 30 years. They follow these kids that are called at risk, meaning that they're in environments that are not very favorable. And they did a 30-year longitudinal study following these kids and how they grow up and how they respond to life events, like how many of them flourishes and how many of them have also unfavorable life outcomes. And you see the numbers, like 2/3 of the kids got negatively affected by the negative environment they were in. And 1/3 of the kids, bounced back from those difficulties, and some of them even thrived and from those conditions. And we have famous examples like Oprah, right, coming from at risk type of environment, and then becoming super successful and flourishing out of that environment. So, and what is the difference between these children? And they looked at that as well. And one of the most important factors was actually the resilient kids had a healthy attachment to at least one adult individual when they were kids. So they had positive relationship and an attachment with one adult. So because early childhood experiences are so important, that because it allows our brain and nervous system shape in a certain way. And the way we change our physiology, when we were talking about, how your nervous system is mobilized and how do we get back to safety, we learn that as human beings by co-regulating with others. And we learn co-regulation when we are young. Mostly parents are, caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a big factor, and still it is a big factor, because through co-regulating with others that we feel safe with, we get ourselves to change our physiology or also psychological state. So co-regulation is very important. That understanding of support, feeling safe with others, allows our body to go back to a state where it feels like I'm supported, I can be safe with these people, therefore I can bounce back and I don't have to give stress response the whole time, right? With this chronic. So that co-regulation and the support from others are important. Another thing that they found was the kids who were resilient had an internal locus of control. Which
what's that?
Locus of control.
Locus. Okay. So what does that mean?
The difference between internal locus of control and external locus of control. Internal locus is when you feel like you happen to world. Basically, I have the power to change certain things in my life. I have the power and the responsibility. My failure and success depends on me rather than the external condition. An external locus of control is giving control to external situations and events. I'm like this because my parents were like that. Universe hates me. I'm an unlucky person. Nothing good happens to me, right? Attributing the causes of what's happening in our life to external events. And compared to that, internal locus gives us the sense of, regardless of what's happening and the external situation, there's something I can do and it depends on me. Right? And we also see internal locus being correlated with confidence. Because in this sense, you have the power to influence the world in your mind, at least.
It does.
Right? And when you have that, it's easier to deal with challenges because you trust that you have some influence over what's going to happen and what can affect you and how.
It sounds like it's more of an innate quality, resilience, or is it not?
There's no gene for resilience as far as we know. It's not innate in that sense. There may be some internal dispositions combined with the environment playing out differently, definitely. But it's mostly our experiences from early life on and the mental patterns that we adopt. And also, we also learn these mental patterns from others, right? You can model it from parents. When you start reading, you can model it from a book. You learn how to think about the world in the environment that you're in. So I would say in that sense, it's more environmental. But the good thing is that being environmental and it's through learning, it means that we can change it.
Right. And then how do you do that? What are some of the things that people do in order to improve resilience? I mean, we see that you're saying that, from my understanding, resilience is us moving from fight or flight, and back up to the state of calm. That's essentially it, correct?
What's the physiological foundation that we need for it, but there's also
Mm-hmm.
psychological aspects of it.
Okay.
For example, the stories you make about that. Again,
Mm-hmm.
in episodes before, we discussed how brain is a story making machine. Everything is a story, right?
Yeah.
We don't have access to reality, so we create these mental maps about things. We make stories about who we are, what life is, and why this is happening. So your narratives about the event are crucial in terms of how you're going to get affected by that event.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're seeing, like, you have a potentially traumatizing event, let's say, and you generalize it in a way that, like, it's because you're a bad person or you're an unlucky person, and you globalize it to everything about the world, like, because something bad happened in one aspect of the life, you expect bad things to happen to you in all aspects of life, right?
Yeah.
You globalize that expectation, then of course your worldview and how you understand the world and that event is drastically different than someone who sees it as a one specific event, and things happen to people, right? And they focus on how am I going to get out of that.
I wonder how much of it is being controlled by emotions itself. So, for example, you hear a lot of people talking about being in a funk, right? So something terrible has happened with them, and they're in a funk, and it's hard. And I see this a lot with people with depression. You can't logically speak to someone out of it. And I feel like resilience is pretty much the state you're in when you're not in a depressive mode, when you're not sad, when you're not in that funk. And I hear this a lot about people saying that it feels comfortable staying in that depressed, even if they're not depressed. They're like they say quote unquote depressed, but they're really like melancholy, and it feels comfortable. And I hear that a lot, and that's the biggest reason why they don't want to get out of it. So I wonder how.
That's a big discussion. So depression is what's happening, and
Mm-hmm.
and what's happening in the nervous system, not just the brain, is a different topic. So I don't want to discuss depression as disordered depression.
Right.
But in terms of emotions, so this is the funny thing. Resilient people is not like people who doesn't feel the emotions when something bad happens. It's usually the opposite. They feel the emotions because it's a response to that event. Like if you lost someone, you are supposed to be able to feel sadness, right? If you're not feeling sadness, that's a more of an indicator of maybe you're not dealing with it right, and probably your system is going to carry it for a longer time. So feeling the emotion is not always bad. It actually, like, you are supposed to feel the appropriate emotion when the event is happening. The thing is, then you can let it go. So that's why the stories become very important. What meaning you gave to that event.
Right.
You see it, and for the pandemic, people have different stories, different narratives around it, what it means to be going through this narrative. And we were having conversation before. You also mentioned some of the store owners that got damaged. Can you talk about that? Like, for example,
you see this. I mean, like even right now in the stories right now that we're seeing like a lot of store owners, small business store owners whose stores are completely destroyed, and these are immigrants. These are immigrants and refugees, and you don't see the whole thing, but you have a tale of a person breaking down, which is normal, and then I see another where they walk in upset clearly, but the next thing they think of, they literally take a broom and then they start sweeping, and then they take their stuff, they push the shelves back up on the shelf, like they basically take their bookshelf and push it back on the shelf, and they just keep on going. They're sad, they're not moping, but they go back right up.
And I think
they just keep going.
Two things about these people, right? Number one, I expect that person have an internal locus of control. Yes, external, something happened, but there's something I can do in response to it, right? It's not getting into the victim mentality. It's about brain going directly, okay, what is the thing that I need to do right next, like, because it already happened. So, and the second one is because I know also some people who had damaged stores and restaurants and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they saw it, the meaning you give to that event. So when they saw it, okay, what's happening here in this society is necessary. You know, these protests as a reason, and this is the consequence of the systemic racism that is coming, you know, for such a long time. This is natural consequence of it. And yes, my store got damaged through it, but this is going to lead to something being fixed. Things are going to be better because of these events. So if you give that meaning to what happened, and you had to take some damage because of it, some people say, okay. And I see them on Facebook posting around that. And the people in the neighborhood coming together, and the communities coming together and fixing these stores. Right now in San Jose, my friends are, you know, collecting money to fix the stores in San Jose that got damaged. But they are still in favor of the protest. So people are coming together. So there's a meaning, even if you have to go through something negative.
Right.
And in that sense, what we can learn is when something negative happens, that's, again, my life motto. And I always say this: shit happens, turn it to fertilizer, not look at it as, how am I going to endure it? I want to go one step, beyond that. How am I going to flourish out of it? The first, time we knew that, okay, we're going to have the stay at home orders, and we're going to be getting in lockdown, pandemic was becoming real early in March. And I made a video about that at that time. The first thing I thought about, what are the risks for me and for my business, for my family? I addressed that really quickly and made my action plans. But I put majority of my time towards thinking, how am I going to use this time, and what's happening in the world right now as an opportunity? Where is the opportunity that lies in this event? So when you have this perspective, it's difficult to be traumatized by this event, even if it's difficult. I lost almost 80% of my income, monthly income, right?
Right.
But it created that space and time that I needed to do the things that I wanted to do so long for my business as well. And I'm pretty sure it's going to pay off everything and more that I lost in these months. But that's my narrative. That's the story I'm telling myself.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to get at is that the stories that we tell ourselves, how much of it is emotion based, and those are often really hard to, and it is based on a reference. So I'm thinking just for myself, but or even other people, or what I've observed, it is based on a reference that they could pull, which is what they've seen and what they've experienced, and that's the only reference they can pull from. So, and then how much of it is emotion based, or how much of it is emotion based because of the reference that they could pull from. You know what I mean?
I think everybody has all these emotions. All human beings have the emotions that we have. So
Right.
That doesn't explain the differences in the mindsets we have. The story is, this is more of a mental pattern. If you create a mental pattern and you use it frequently, it's easy for it to use for you, right?
Yeah, because how we choose to view something or not, some of us, and I could speak to myself, is I view it based on as much probability as possible, which may or may not be the right thing, which may or may not be the right solution. Because sometimes I'll have an outlook where something bad happens to me, and then I have to keep going. But then I could see a lot of people saying what's the point? This will happen, that will happen. I mean, they're stuck in it one way or another, the story to tell themselves, because they're overwhelmed with emotions. For example, if I had a shop and I lost all my income, the story you tell yourself, instead of thinking what next to do, it could very well be that I'm going to lose my home, I'm going to feed my family, all these other, they go down that direction, as opposed to what to do next.
Patterns. Those are not emotions.
Yeah, but I think what I'm saying is that they go down to that thinking pattern because they're over. Oh, I don't know. I don't know if it's that they go down the thinking pattern and then the emotion comes afterwards in their head, or is it that they just have this default emotion? They decide to choose one thinking path versus the other. You know what I mean?
There are things we give emotional response to without conscious component to it, meaning that
Okay.
our amygdala, especially, it stores the emotional, it has the emotional memories react to it, especially for fear. So, and we may not even know why, because they are learned through associative learning. Let's say a veteran comes home and then he starts having like PTSD attacks, and he doesn't know what is triggering it, and they figure out that is the soap they're using is the same soap they used when the events were happening, the traumatic events were happening. So it brings the association, that smell brings out the emotion, the fear, right? So, but there is no really conscious pattern. Like, we're reacting to things in the environment sometimes with emotions directly because we associated something that happened before, not conscious, automatically. So that's one source of, responding to it. So the emotion comes first in that sense.
Right.
But then there's also emotions that we lead to through our thinking patterns. How you think about something determines how you're going to feel about it. If you were late to, our live, let's say we're going to meet here and you're 15 minutes late.
Yeah.
And if my narrative, my story about it is, look at Tony. He is disrespecting me. He is not taking this seriously. What kind of a person he is? He's so shitty. And how do you think I would feel if this is my story?
Yeah, you would feel really bad. You have more negative emotions than positive ones, for sure.
Yeah, I would feel angry. But if my story around this is, Tony didn't show up, what's happening? Is he okay? And I would be worried for you then. So do you understand how my story determines what I'm going to feel about a situation?
Yeah, that's right.
So by changing the story, we are able to change the emotion that comes with it. And also we have the primary emotion, like when something happens, we respond with sadness, let's say. And then we think about that event. And if my story is blaming myself for what happened, right, then I'm going to have a secondary emotion, guilt, added to it. And if I add a story to it, how it has happened because of other people, then I'm going to add anger to it. So
right. Okay.
Our thinking patterns keep adding to the emotions that we are having rather than the initial emotion, because emotion is something you wait 6 seconds, it goes away. You don't hold on to it. You just have to endure it for 6 seconds.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I mean, I guess it's, being resilient is not entirely innate.
No.
It's kind of like a starting point, right?
It's not innate. I think it's more shaped by the environment and learning experiences. There's no gene for resilience, so that's the good thing. You can, and when they follow these kids that I mentioned to you for 30 years, what they realize is some kids were resilient for a long time and then they lost it because so many things happened that they couldn't handle, that was above their tolerance levels. And some kids were not that resilient, but they learned it later in life and they become resilient as adults. So it's not like a fixed thing. Your resilience level is not a fixed thing. So you can always improve it. And I think that's a great investment to work on that.
How much of it is like believing? Like, there's one thing to know what the proper narrative is. There's the other to actually believe it. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, to actually believe it. Like, what the right path and the right story is. Well, even that in itself is actually a challenge.
Let's start with that.
Okay.
Believing means that you assume one of those stories are true.
Right.
But I'm telling you, your brain is, all of them are stories. It's not about which one is true. You can write infinite amount of stories about any event that happened, and none of them are true or false. It's a creative process, like an artwork. Think about that. That's not like a 2 + 2 = 4. Like, you don't have the right way and true way of looking at it. Once you develop that belief that you understand your capacity for narratives and for stories, then you realize there are stories that creates good results for us, and there are stories that creates bad results for us and for other people in the world.
Yep.
It's about picking the stories that you feel like that works for you and for people around you, that are stories that are helpful. All of them are stories. We are not trying to pick the right true story. We're trying to pick the story that is helpful in this time, for you and people around you, for the ecosystem as well.
Right.
And I train all my clients in mental flexibility because I think that's a crucial skill in life for for everyone, especially for our leaders, and which is the ability to create different stories about every event, not necessarily picking one of them, just our understanding there are 10 different stories I can write about this event, and understanding it, knowing these 10 different stories, narratives, explanations for what happened or what can happen, gives us mental flexibility. So we cannot attach to one story too strongly. And it makes us flexible. It makes us resilient. It makes us to change the story when it stops working for us.
Yeah. That sounds like there's a tremendous amount of practice that's involved for that.
I think developing mindset is the most important one. Yes, it takes time and practice, and you need to learn. Like if you have mental patterns that leads you to rumination and negative mental experiences, you go back to the same loop and it takes you down. It doesn't help you. It makes you angry. It makes you sad. It means that you really need to look at those stories and the mental patterns and find a way to fix it. There are professionals that can help you with that. You can study it yourself, figure it out. One technique you can, if you're watching, you can read is called reappraisal. And
Appraisal, okay.
And it is used by psychologists a lot. And it helps you to kind of look at the situation and develop different ways of seeing that situation. Like, I mentioned in mental flexibility one. The one I use very frequently is pick an event that upsets me, bothers me, makes me afraid, this and that. I write the event, I write the story in my head, then I write 9 other stories about it, narratives or explanations about it, what this may mean. And I don't force myself to pick any. I just want to hold it all in my mind. There are all the different ways of seeing it. That's my mental flexibility practice I created. And I also would strongly recommend to people to seek support. Also, in resilience studies, what they saw is, especially religious and spiritual support, was something that they saw in resilient people. But I think going beyond that, support of other people, a co-regulation with other people that you feel safe with, that's the key word. Not just any people, just don't go socialize for the sake of socializing, but really forming connection with the people that you're safe with helps our physiology, help our nervous system to bounce back. Also allows us to develop healthier mental patterns. Because guess what? The people who feel safe and safer, you feel safe with, usually have better mental patterns.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in order to think, it's easy to go down to like a negative. I feel like it's more easier to go down to a negative thought pattern, but when you feel safe, it makes it a lot easier to go down to a more positive one. Like I feel like a more positive thought pattern requires a tremendous amount of like courage, I guess, or like optimism, and it becomes more easier when you have a.
You're writing right now.
Yeah, exactly.
You just wrote a story about. I think it requires tremendous courage, this and that. Maybe it's not that hard. Maybe you can write a story that is easy. You can do 5 minutes of something and it will be life-changing at the end if you do this with the small.
For sure. But I think that it becomes a lot even more difficult because I think it's easier for all of us to have more audacious visions, grand visions of ourselves. But really where it becomes difficult is the day-to-day. Right, the stories we tell ourselves every single day, and there's lots of small ones.
Yeah, and the story, you can write the story about it. By doing something simple and easy every day, I can create an upward, progress.
Yeah.
Every day, right?
Yeah, and it would help if it was something specific too. tied to something very, very specific
Yeah.
that we're facing in terms of a challenge that helps us being resilient, right? Whether it's
Yes.
work or what have you.
And we don't know what life is going to bring to us.
Hmm.
You know, you never know. And I've had, my share of them. Um, and it's good to think about it, not only those negative events, but like dealing with regular stresses of daily life and preparing for it, but also preparing ourselves when something difficult happens. And as we get older, we expect it to happen more frequently. We can get sick, we can lose the loved ones, our parents, when you're getting older. It's
Yeah.
natural part of life. And you want to really prepare yourself for that. Put the work in. Again, create close connections with people that you're feeling safe with. It's very important for our well-being and resilience. Create mental flexibility. Look at your mental patterns and create mental patterns that work for you, that instead of that works against you. And
Yeah.
training, heart rate variability training is, I think it's very important as well. And regulating our nervous system, the physiological aspect of is very important as well. But let's talk about that next time.
Yeah, and also going off of like making sure you have good relationships. I think that it's really important to actually. This is why it's really good to talk out your problems, because they'll be able to help regulate your thought patterns, right? When you're talking about, like say for example, you own a store and your store is completely decimated by the riots. You could talk to your friends about it, and then they'll be able to support you, and that actually helps. I think that could, but let me know if I might be wrong, but that could help change that narrative. Because when you feel alone, I feel that's when people typically go through a more negative thought pattern. Then if they don't feel alone, they tend to think more positively. They feel like they're okay.
I agree because I think
Mm.
social support, especially when you're going through something negative, is very important. And unfortunately here in US, because I grew up in Turkey, and it's a different culture than here. In Turkey, when something bad happens to you, you have a breakup or something else, your friends, that it's an expected thing that you're going to call your friends, talk about it, and then you're going to go out, drink and cry together and stuff like that, listen to sad songs if it's a breakup thing, and then there's some encouragement. There's plenty of fish in the sea. But it's not just that. Like, there is time and space allocated for going through that negative emotion. They allow you to feel it, they allow you to share it, right? And you do that for your friends,
Right.
But here in the US, I feel like it's less accepted. You should not whine and share your problems with other people. It's kind of shunned. You're just like, okay, you broke up, whatever, not a big deal. Just be a grown up. Like, why do you keep whining about this to me? Like, this is 3 days in a row now.
Right.
I'm done
Right.
with you.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
not in the description of friendship. Unlike in Turkey, that's one of the big pillars of friendship, that you need to show up when they need you when they are going through negative stuff. In US, we don't have that. And I think that's a weakness. And that creates that lack of support for people going through difficult situations. So if you have people who are willing to do that with you, it's great. But don't fall into the mistake of rumination. This doesn't mean that you keep the vicious cycle of that mental pattern and you keep ruminating about the same thing over and over again, and then your friends enabling it. I'm not talking about that. So there's a fine line between allowing you to express your emotions, go through it, and friends helping their friends to find healthier mental patterns, share their perspectives on it, can be really helpful. So I think I agree with you in that sense that, find friends that also helps. When you talk to them, you feel better. Or friends, go to them, not, select the ones that really you feel that it's helpful. They help you co-regulate rather than fanning your flames.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking for friends that would be more of a coach than a friend who's just there to hype you up. I mean, it's got to be a balance, but
not necessarily. Sometimes what people need is just an understanding, empathetic ear. They don't want to, suggestions about how to think. It's just
that's true.
Together, and like their tone of voice, because our nervous system responds to to their physiological state. If I'm mobilized and they're in, ventral vagal, and they feel safe, they feel calm, they feel at ease, it's contagious. So by just being in the presence of that person, I may start feeling better. I know how to regulate myself. So it's not about giving advice, coaching, or anything. It can be part of it, doesn't have to be. It's about connecting. It's about laughing, about even to your misfortune, finding, like with my best friend, that's what we do a lot, is, when shitty things happen, like we cry a little bit, but we laugh a lot in the same conversation because we find it funny, mistakes or what people do is find kind of the humor in it as well. And it allows us to deal with what's happening in that conversation, because it's harder for me to find humor in it when I'm just thinking in my head. Like, presence of other makes it easier.
Yeah, definitely. All right. I guess the biggest takeaway from this is that what happens in the past, especially in our childhood, can definitely affect how resilient we become. But ultimately, it's all within our control, so long as we tell ourselves stories about how we can move forward and be aware of our thought patterns, as well as have a good social group to support us, so that it helps encourage us to have good thought patterns and good stories about ourselves.
Yeah, totally. And the physiological aspect of it, what we can give us to create a better physiological foundation of resilience, we're going to discuss next week.